Good morning and happy Tuesday, second graders. Today's video is going to be on lesson 12-6, which is actually for Wednesday. I wanted to get it up early for you guys in case you're ahead of the game. If not, no worries. Just wanted to be prepared for you. So in yesterday's math, 12-5, we learned how to divide rectangles into equal shares that were the same shape. So we looked at rows and columns, and we made equal shares that were exactly the same shape within a rectangle. Today we're going to be working with rectangles again and equal shares, but this time we're going to be doing different shapes, going to be creating different shapes. The key here is that our shapes, even though they're different, they are going to have equal shares. Think back to what that means. Equal means the same. So they're going to be the same number of squares. Each share will have the same number of squares. A share in a rectangle is a part. So each part, if they're equal, they must have the same number of squares within them, okay? So let's get started with our video and then we'll proceed with the reteaching worksheet as usual.
How can this rectangle be divided into 3 equal shares?
Let's think back to what we did yesterday. We divided a rectangle into equal shares that were the same shape, right? So we could go across and draw rows. We could draw 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows. Or we could draw columns. 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. So each row and column has the same number of squares. 3 in each column, 3 in each row. This is called a 3 by 3 rectangle. 3 across, 3 down.
You can draw lines to make 3 columns. You can also draw lines to make 3 rows. Is there any other way this rectangle can be divided into 3 equal shares?
Okay, so we have to be creative here. Is there any other way that you can see that we could make 3 equal shares in this rectangle? Meaning we would still need to have the same number of squares in each share. There has to be 3, but not straight across in rows and not up and down in columns straight down. Let's see.
You can draw lines to make 3 equal shares with different shapes, too. How do you know that these are also 3 equal shares?
So let's look at these lines. These are not straight up and down. There's a zigzag up here. But we see that within each of these shares, each of these parts, there are still 3 squares. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there are still 3 parts, 3 shares, and they are equal because they have 3 squares within them. Equal shares.
Each share has 3 small rectangles, so they are equal shares. What are some things that are the same about these 3 rectangles?
What can we say that is the same about all of these rectangles? Well, they are all 3 by 3, right? They all have 3 across and 3 down. There are 3 equal shares. Anything else you can think?
The rectangles are the same size and shape, and each of the 3 rectangles has 3 equal shares. What is the same about all of the shares? What is different?
I think right off the bat we can say that the same about all of these shares is that there are 3 smaller rectangles, or squares as we've been calling them, in each of the shares, right? 3 in the columns, 3 in the rows, and 3 in this different shaped rectangle. What is different though? Well, we can see that the way that we have organized each of the shares is different. In the first rectangle, we have organized it by columns. In the second rectangle, we have organized it by rows. And in the third rectangle, we've had 3 different shapes to organize the shares. The important thing to remember is that they are the same because they are each the same size and shape, and their shares are 3 in each. 3 small squares in each share.
Each share has 3 small rectangles, so they all have the same area, but they have different shapes. Equal shares can be different shapes.
All right, so let's look at our reteaching page. So we just learned that equal shares can be different shapes. The important thing is that if it's an equal share, it must have the same number of smaller squares or smaller rectangles within each share. So if there are 3 equal shares, they have to have the same number of smaller squares in each of those parts, in each of those 3 parts, okay? So we can divide a rectangle into equal shares. The equal shares can be different shapes, as we saw. They don't have to be straight across in rows. They don't have to be straight up and down in columns. But for shares to be called equal, meaning the same, they must be the same size. So they have to have the exact same number of squares that are the same size in each share. This rectangle shows 2 equal shares, okay? So we can see that this rectangle has been split up into 2 equal shares with how many squares in each share? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 3 squares in each equal share. They are equal because they are the same size and there are the same number of squares in each of them. Do we see that? All right. We're going to draw lines to divide the rectangles into equal shares, and then we'll write the number of squares in each equal share. So I will show you a couple different ways to divide these rectangles into equal shares. Remember, they must what? Be the same size to be called equal. So let's look at this first one. Let's go back to yesterday's lesson. When we were dividing rectangles into equal shares, we either did it by rows or by columns, okay? So let's look at this square. We see that there are 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, or you can say 2 on the left, 2 on the right. So let's show 2 different ways to divide this rectangle into equal shares. We can go straight across, which will leave us with 2 equal shares with how many squares in each row? 1, 2, 1, 2. All right? We can also draw a line straight down, giving us 2 columns. 1 column, 2 columns. How many squares in each column? 1, 2, 1, 2. So that was 2 ways to show 2 ways to show equal shares of 2 squares in each. All right? Now, let's get a little creative down with number 2. We'll start with what we know from yesterday. We can divide this rectangle into equal shares by going straight across or by doing columns. All right? So let's first start with rows. If we draw a line straight across, we give ourselves 2 rows. A row up here and a row down here. Let's see how many squares are in each row. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we were to draw this line straight across, the answer to this question, how many squares in each equal share, would be what? We have 2 equal shares with how many squares in each? 4. Oops. Well, it doesn't want me to draw 4. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Good. All right. Let's try a different way. We can draw columns. 1 column, 2, 3, and 4. Do you see that? 1 column, 2 column, 3 columns, 4 columns. Okay? If we divide our rectangle this way, how many squares are in each share? Not 4 this time. This time we have 4 columns, but in each column there are 1, 2 squares. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So if we were to draw it that way, we would have 2 squares in each equal share. Now here's the fun part. Let's get creative. What if I were to draw a little zigzag line here? Let's watch the magic happen. Straight down here, I'll go across and down again. Let's see. Check that out. Do we have equal shares? Let's count the squares in each share that I just drew. I see that I have split my rectangle into 2 parts, 2 shares. Let's see how many squares are in each of these shares, and we'll determine if they're equal. In my first share, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. Okay, let's look over on this side of the line. In this share, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. Did I make 2 equal shares? Yes, I did. I split my rectangle into 2 equal shares. They're equal because they are the same size. They both have 4 squares in each of them. So this is a fun lesson because you can kind of play around with your shapes, with your rectangles, but the important thing is if you're going to create equal shares, you have to make sure that you have the same number of smaller squares in each of them, okay? So if you don't have the same number of squares in each share, we can't call them equal. All right, happy learning.